Hello, hello, everyone. I am happy to be here. My guest on today's episode is none other than the lovely Tracie Sponenberg. Her LinkedIn headline reads HR advisor, fractional chief people officer, keynote speaker, coach, facilitator, connector, introvert, HR tech, and AI enthusiast. And the part that I love even more, fiercely people first. So without further ado, Tracie, hello, and thank you so much for showing up.
Thanks for inviting me, David. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So clearly, there's so much awesomeness jam packed into that, into that LinkedIn headline. When people ask you what you do, you can tell them a million things, right? Because you do a million different things. How do you typically answer that question of like, "Hey, Tracie, what is it that you do again?"
Well, it's changed a lot, right? Even within the last 6 months since I went out on my own, 6, 7 months. So I used to say I'm a chief people officer, and then I'd have to do a deeper dive. But what I talk about now is I recently started my own business and advising companies on how to level up and upskill their HR teams. And essentially, like if I can remember to say it, I say getting CEOs to see the potential in their HR teams and getting HR teams to see the potential in themselves.
I love that, and that's a very pithy and succinct and memorable pitch as well. If you wouldn't mind giving us your take on what it is, what fractional means, because I've
Yeah.
heard that phrase a lot, particularly in the
Yeah.
last couple of years. And you being a fractional executive, you might have a little bit more insight on what that word means to you. What's your definition of that word?
Yeah, I think it can be somewhat controversial. I mean, not being fractional, but the term itself, because it does mean different things to different people. And the way I define it is long-term, part-time, working for yourself, not for the company. So as a fractional chief people officer, I might go into a company X amount of hours per week and do something very similar to what I was doing before as a chief people officer, but working for myself on a compressed schedule, keeping as a CPO, keeping it to largely to strategy, and there's a big variation. And I think the debate comes when is it interim, is it fractional? And interim I define as more a shorter period of time, usually full time, but fractional means a fraction of your time.
I love that. Keeping it simple for us. That's
Yeah.
awesome. When I was Googling you, as I am wont to do, I saw a snippet and I that resonated with me because I consider myself a recovering HR person now turned coach. I saw a snippet and it said it was, I think, off of an older website you might have had. I started my career as a compliance first paper wielding HR lady, right? So I
Yeah.
want to kind of ask you a little bit about that genesis and how did you get started? What were your first jobs like? How did you get into the world of HR? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I started my career as it was in college. So I interned for UPS, which was 20 minutes down the road from Works. My dad knew somebody who worked there, and I worked like 10 to 20 hours a week for a couple of years during college doing, verifications of references and really, entry level things. And I came out of school in the mid 90s and there were no jobs to be had, and they created one for me. So I feel both, really grateful and really lucky at a terrible economic time, much like we're going through today,
Mm,
that I lucked into that. It was a huge company, obviously, global company, huge company. I learned a ton, but what I did was learn to lead with compliance and learned that I learned safety and I learned, laws and I learned, how to interview people in 3 minutes and make a decision. And I learned, really big company things, which is great at the time, but I carried that through with me for far, far too long and said no far too much and really put
mm.
the company first rather than people first. And then, really started to change about a dozen years ago, 10 years ago, and then fully changed once I worked at the Granite Group and worked for a truly people first company, my first time ever.
And one thing I saw a lot in your so-called brand is just who you talk a lot about, being an introvert, kind of an open and
Yeah.
proud introvert, as am I. What has that been like in terms of your role being so people first and people focused? What are your thoughts on being an introvert in this profession that you chose?
I think there are parts of my job that I've been really good at, and I'm thoughtful and reflective and will think before I act. And that's really helpful when you're trying to move a people's strategy forward. I also really I mean, this is not why I got into HR, but like I like people. I like spending time with people one-on-one. And so when I started at my company and we had 25, 30 locations and I had to go to all of them by myself, that was really hard. It's like walking into a room where I knew no one, going up saying, "Hey, I'm your new CPO," was really, really hard. So I just had to kind of break it down to I'm having a conversation with one individual. I'm having a conversation with another individual. I'm having a conversation with another individual. And, did things over time that made it easier, like announced to everybody that I was coming. So if I didn't know someone's name, they knew me, and, just had little strategies like that that helped. And then I get to know people and got a lot more comfortable with that.
I love that. Even when as a coach, I have, sort of direct to consumer coaching, and then I also work with some enterprise clients. And I used to be overwhelmed and intimidated. And then I realized that it's also, I'm speaking to a person at that big
Yeah.
corporation. I'm speaking to a human being. And that just made it that much more bite-sized, if you will,
Yeah.
and doable. So it's just a mindset shift, really,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
I love that.
100%.
So you recently started, and I've been following your journey on LinkedIn a little bit of your own Tracie Sponenberg LLC, if I'm not mistaken,
You are
which
right.
is exciting, and I'll ask you some questions about that. But if you take a look at the totality of everything that you've done, and there's 20 plus years of awesome experience there, what are you most proud of?
It there's a couple of things. I think that shift was really important to me, like that shifted my career. And then my former director, who's now VP at the Granite Group, Monica Apgar, working with her, I worked with her a lot over the course of the few years we worked together. She came to my team with zero experience in HR, but had a real desire, had run her own business, understood the business. And so working with her, seeing her grow and seeing her get promoted multiple times, I'm super proud of that. I'm proud of her, but I'm proud of our relationship and what developed there. And then I'm proud of myself for stepping out on my own because it was really, I just had to get over myself. That was the
Mhm.
hard part. I had to get over myself, and everyone else had more confidence in me than I had myself. So I had to find that and just do it.
That is a story I hear often. But by the way, there are plenty of obstacles and difficulty and
Yeah.
competition and market, sort of
Yeah.
variables. There's plenty to kind of be obstacles for us, but sometimes the biggest obstacle is ourselves. And one thing I love doing as a coach is just being that mirror for people. And sometimes they just end up laughing as to how much energy they've sort of spent or even wasted on agonizing over the thing before it even happens, or
Mhm.
assuming the worst and not even trying. And so once we get out of our own way, magical things can really happen. So I
Yeah.
hear that on you about you. Now, I'm a big believer. I actually try to take the pejorative out of the word mistake, because life is full of mistakes, right? But there are plenty of lessons to be had from quote unquote failures or mistakes.
Mm.
There's that phrase of you either you either succeed or you learn. So
Mhm.
it's a win-win. Obviously, failing isn't always pleasant. It often sucks. But could you point to either a time in your life or a specific moment where you feel like, oh yeah, that was not my best moment. That was either a failure, a mistake, or something in that. And then what did you kind of, what did you take away from that?
Yeah, I had a couple recent examples, and of course, I fail often, and as we all do, right? And I have tried to embrace that. It's difficult for me. It's difficult for most people, right?
Yeah.
But I really have tried to embrace that, especially in recent years. So I had an opportunity to grow my team several years ago, and I hired someone. And this was an interesting failure. I hired the wrong person. I hired somebody that I thought could do it, and there were lots of other factors that weren't going to work in that person's favor. And I tried really hard, and I ultimately had to let that person go. But I built up a whole segment of the department around that person, and kind of leaned everything on succeeding on that one person, which wasn't fair to them, wasn't fair to the department, wasn't fair to the company, but it was a whole thing that I created that was a giant, it just blew up in my face, right? And still stayed there. Everything was fine. That person ultimately moved on to things that were better suited to them. But that was a huge failure. And then a more recent one, which I haven't actually talked about at all, was, well, at least publicly. So this is the first time I'm talking about it. I stepped out of the corporate world with a full client load, my former company, and then a new fractional client. And I made a giant mistake in working with that company. In that, it was a company that I knew that I would not take a job there as an employee. And I figured, it would be fine fractionally that the position was layered under the CFO. I'm like, well, I'm working for myself. That's fine. And, I wasn't looking at the signs. Decent people, successful company, good people, successful company, but not for me. And I think that was a mistake for me, but I'm still grateful for that mistake because without that, I would not have left. And it was time to go. It was time to start my own thing. And that also caused me to kind of look at my business and how I was doing business and what I was offering. And so that mistake turned into a huge positive.
Yeah. And it often does, but again, like in the moment, it's challenging when people try to, there's also like what is it, forced or toxic positivity where people say, hey, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
It may be great, but in the moment, sometimes we're not receptive to that message, and we have to just, navigate the muck and learn from it eventually, if not in the moment. And that's part of the journey too. Um,
Yeah.
Curious because I think, if I'm not mistaken, you do specialize. I mean, your skills can be transferable to a lot of different industries, I believe. But
Yeah.
you focus on one industry, is that right? And if so, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, distribution and manufacturing and related industries like the light industrial industry, people who are working with companies that have warehouses of things that they're moving from one place to another, any kind of logistics, right? And so I spent at least half my career in that environment. I love that world. I think it's really underserved in a lot of ways, and I think there's enormous potential for upskilling HR teams. Some are there for sure, but there's a lot of potential because that sector of the world doesn't get enough love in their people practices for sure.
Mm, mm. And talk to, because I was in HR environments, and I've been in HR environments that were sort of dinosaurs in terms of technology, and others that were at the forefront, right? Because they were the
Yeah.
ones adopting and communicating, technology, emerging technology, best in class technology, best practices to the rest of the enterprise. What's been your experience with like technology, and maybe you can speak to like AI and how you kind of see technology and specifically AI,
Yeah.
vis-a-vis the HR practice these days.
Yeah, I think so I was at one of those companies where I don't know that leading technology, but specifically with AI, my last company, I wouldn't shut up about it from the time
Hmm.
that ChatGPT came out and we've got to do this, we've got to do this, and to the point
Yeah.
when I was leaving, some of the leaders were like, "Hey, we're looking at this company and it's AI." And I'm like, "That's great, finally." So I think our industry tended to be pretty slow to adopt, and I've always loved technology. And I think HR technology, particularly in companies like mine, there tends to not be a whole lot of knowledge. There tends to be not a whole lot of experience. And so that's become a real passion of mine. And there's a company called Harriet out of the UK that I've been doing a little bit of work with that's AI based, and they're specifically looking to get into this kind of area because it's underserved, like, right? So being able to communicate if you're out on the road or if you're in a warehouse and get these answers, you're not necessarily going to pick up the phone and call your HR rep, but how do you get them? So it's all, I'm particularly interested in technology that solves a problem, particularly that solves a communication problem, because I think a lot of problems boil down to some sort of issue with communication.
I couldn't agree more, which is why, when someone asks me like, what do I do? And I say communication coach, sometimes they might think it's like marketing communication or specific like corporate communication, and that's not it at all. I focus on the soft skills of owning your own voice in any space, usually professional, talking to your team, talking to your boss, your board, your CEO,
Mhm.
investors, client, I mean, you name it, right? It's all talking and listening, right? It's some combination of both. So communication coaching to me is really all type of coaching. I mean, anyway, but that's a story for another day. That's
Yeah.
just my little spiel. It's sort of it spills into every aspect of life, and
Absolutely.
people come in for one little sort of specific thing that they want to work on, and then we can kind of see how that relates to how they show up, in their first 90 days, how they show up when things get difficult, how they leave, whether they leave on a good note, burn bridges, or end gracefully, right? Their tenure
Yep.
at a company, how they talk about that company once they leave, right? It's all communication in my book, right?
Yep.
So
Totally
I
agree.
wanted to, I know that you've done quite a bit, at least since you've been on my radar, on LinkedIn. You've done quite a bit of traveling, some speaking, so keynote as a keynote speaker, attending those conferences. Tell me, what is it that you talk about? What types of areas or topics are you talking about these days? And then maybe any highlights, any keynotes or areas that you visited lately that stand out.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? So I didn't have a passport till I was 45. I'm going to be 52. And so I didn't travel a ton until I was, really the kids were older and for a lot of different reasons. And so I've been making up for lost time and trying to take every opportunity to travel. And so my most recent keynote was in Romania. So in Brasov, Romania, for a conference called the Everything HR Conference. And there were several of us sprinkled throughout the days keynoting. So I met some wonderful people, and what they wanted me to focus on, because up till now I would get hired by someone, they'll say, speak about anything, or we want you to talk about AI, or we want you to talk about HR tech. So it's kind of been HR tech, um, HR transformation, or some variation of that for the most part. And I've done branding and different things, but for the most part, it's been that. But this one was, what does the future of work look like from your perspective in the US? So I put together something that was a practical practitioner's perspective, because I'm
Mm,
really practical at heart.
yeah.
And so I want to give some takeaways. And I also wove in a lot of insights from some of my friends who may have a different point of view or a different lens through which they look. So that was really fun. Romania was beautiful. I had never been, never thought of going,
Mm.
but I can't wait to go back. It was a
That's
wonderful
amazing.
opportunity.
And your photos were just awesome. I had been many, many years ago, so it was a sort of like waves of nostalgia that were washing over me when I was looking at some of your
Oh,
of
you
your
said that.
clips. Now, the other thing is you have a partner in your business, and it's called coffee. It's called caffeine, right? So that's like
It
a
is.
character in your life that plays a prominent role. So talk to me about your relationship with caffeine, because I think there's a
Mm.
lot of joy and fun there to be had. So.
Yeah, it's funny, as if people are just listening, they don't see me drinking my 1 o'clock coffee, so I can't drink it past 2 or I won't be able to sleep. But I only have a couple a day. But I didn't drink coffee till I was in my 30s. And I don't know where the sort of love came from. I think when my husband and I first got married, it was a second marriage for us both. And so we spent a lot of time at Starbucks and going to coffee shops, and neither of us drink alcohol. So instead of like breweries in the Northeast where we live are huge, right? So instead of traveling around to breweries or wineries, we travel around New England or wherever we are to coffee shops. So it just kind of started like that. And I just started sharing some of that, as did a number of other people in the HR community. And out of all the things that I post, and I usually post about coffee on weekends and not all the time, that is by far the thing that people comment on the most. And I
Mhm.
think it's not ever just about coffee, it's always about something else too. Like there's always a hidden message, really. And it's just, I think it's community, right? Coffee is community. It brings us together. And, I've gotten a ton of great recommendations from that. And it's so integral to what I do that my friend Josh Green, who's working on my website, is like, I'm putting in a tab that's coffee. So like you're gonna
Hmm.
have a section that's coffee. So it's fun. It's
Yeah.
just a way to bring people together.
And I love I'm both a tea drinker and a coffee drinker, and I
Mm.
especially love drinking coffee at cafes when I'm traveling. For me, drinking coffee uh, and traveling are almost synonymous. I just
Mm.
love to travel the world and do that. So it resonates on so many different levels.
Mm.
Um, and do you remember your first keynote or like your first kind of bigger, stage presence, your opportunity? Do you remember what that was like, or have you banished that
Yeah.
into the depths of your brain and your memory?
No, my first solo presentation, I remember my first presentation I co-presented and I was scared to death, and that was in 2016, so it wasn't all that long ago. My first solo one was in 2017 at HR Tech, which was a pretty big conference, a pretty big stage. It was a breakout, but um, it was on HR Tech for small businesses, and that I really point to as a kickoff for me getting to do just about anything else, because it got
Mhm.
written up by Sherm. I ended up speaking, I don't do much or anything with Sherm anymore, but I ended up speaking national Sherm a couple years later. And that individual thing, Steve Bose taking a chance on me for that one presentation led to so many other cool things.
Yeah, and you stretching that, expanding that comfort zone, which is, again, I know it sounds corny, but it's the only way that I know how to build those muscles and how to grow and learn
Yeah,
is if we get a little bit uncomfortable. I was chatting with someone yesterday about just like the routine of things, like especially if you don't travel and you have your routine. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but
right.
you know, if you kind of look back at like the last decade of your life and you take a little bit of an inventory, in what areas have you stretched yourself and grown and challenged yourself, and you are kind of like indexing on the like really really great, like you're doing that. I know some people that come into my circles who admit that like they've just been stagnating for years, professionally,
Yeah,
personally, with all sorts
yeah,
of relationships. And listen, there's a time and a season for everything, but it's
yeah,
really cool that I get to kind of I get people who are ready. Like they're like, I
yeah,
know, and it's been a problem, and I wanna work on it. And I'm like, all
yeah.
right, let's get started. So
And I
it,
was that person until
yeah,
like 7 years ago. I was like I thought I was going to be working my, HR manager, HR director job. Nothing wrong with that, but like for the
yeah.
rest of my life, I thought, and then I got laid off, and that was the best thing that ever happened to my career.
Mm,
No, I say that this was way back when. I know it's not a good thing for a lot of people.
yeah.
For me, I was ready to leave and I was scared. So for me, it forced me out of my comfort zone.
I had when I was laid off a decade or so ago, it was the best worst summer. Best because I could do when I was living in the city, I could do things like just go to Coney Island on a Tuesday afternoon, and few people, and just go to museums when there were fewer tourists and things like that. So take advantage. But then as the summer started to like come to a close and I couldn't find a job, it was like, uh-oh, I'm not enjoying this anymore. It
Yeah.
was, but I did the best that I could with what I've got, but then I, realized that so many of my clients who had been laid off, not once, but sometimes twice, occasionally even thrice over, like a 30, 40-year career, a lot of times they do bounce back stronger. They do follow, whether it's their heart, sometimes they follow logic and they realize, you know what, it's just a job. Let me just make more money and not stress about it. That can be a good outcome, right? To
Yeah.
sort of separate yourself from the thing that you do for most of your waking hours. So it doesn't always mean you have to follow your heart. Sometimes disassociating and disconnecting from the work and not letting it eat you alive at home on your personal time is a good outcome or is a healthful outcome too.
Yeah, 100%. I have a friend, I remember talking to her several years ago, like she's like, I don't know. I'm thinking about taking this job just for the money. And I'm like, that's okay. Like, don't
Yeah.
feel guilty about that. And that job she knew it wasn't great. It wasn't great, but it led her to her dream job eventually,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so sometimes there's nothing wrong with taking a step like that you don't feel
Yeah.
is perfect.
Yeah. And sometimes you meet, I mean, I've heard of stories, people meeting like at a crappy job, they meet like their future spouse or like their bestie, in life. So there are also those kinds of sort of ancillary, but end up being huge, huge personal milestones in your life because
Yeah.
you either did compromise or you took a risk or something like that. So there's all these sort of infinite possibilities that we don't know until we put that first foot forward. So what do you do outside of when you're not kicking butt in the HR/X tech space/AI/ keynoting around the world? How do you fill your cup with extracurricular or stuff outside of work, if anything?
Oh yeah, tons. So I'm going to Disney World tomorrow. I have the Disney tattoos. So that
Awesome.
big part. We got a Disney Vacation Club membership from my parents and have annual passes. So we're grateful to get to go like pretty often, several times a year. So it's like a second home to me. I just love it. I know some people love it, some people hate it, but it's just super magical and
Yeah.
really makes me happy. So we do that weekend. I'm a huge reader. I read a ton. We hike quite a bit. We've got like 80 miles of hiking trails in our city, and we live in the city. And I used to hike pretty aggressively. I don't do that quite so much anymore, but we spend as much time outdoors as we can. And just, I've grown to appreciate the slowness and the stillness of just sitting on the porch and relaxing, or watching a Hallmark movie at night with my husband, or just having a 2-hour dinner with our kids. And so those are the things that I really love now.
Oh, that's amazing. And the moments of stillness resonate with me. I've read up on like the slow movement. I think it started as like maybe a slow food movement, or just taking time to enjoy what you've got, right? Because it may and will be gone one day, right? Not to be a party pooper, but that's just the
No.
reality of life. And it's one of those things that you can read about the importance of self-care and taking time off, and you can know it as a concept, but until you take that step, and for some people it almost feels risky because it's not their default, until you actually implement it into your own life, chances are something will suffer, right? Whether it's your physical or mental health or social health, and it's not good or bad, it's just is. But again, as a coach, I get to like walk with people through that, and sometimes I have this desire of like you want to fix their problems, but you can't. Not as a coach, you're literally not supposed to fix their problems. You are supposed to guide them and let them kind of guide themselves, help support their own journey on whatever pace and journey they are on. But when you see them taking care of themselves, and then they show up better at work or to their spouse, it's freaking magical. It's the closest that I've seen to sort of magic, right?
Yeah.
So, but so just wanted to again thank you for being such a great sport. How can people learn more about your business and what you do, and potentially learn more about your services?
Well, I used to say like I'm the only Tracie Sponenberg on LinkedIn, but then somebody created a Tracie Sponenberg profile that's not me and blank, but in the next town over. So do follow the one who's got more than 2 followers, and
There we go.
the one with a picture on LinkedIn. And my website is Tracie with an IE Sponenberg.com, and
Awesome.
all kinds of information there. And I'm planning a newsletter for later in the summer, and so there'll be lots of cool stuff coming up that I'm working on. I just have a ton of interest, and I'm taking this time this summer to slow down a bit, work with the clients I have, and explore those interests. And this fall, announce a bunch of new projects.
That's awesome. Well, I don't add me to your list, or remind me to add myself to that upcoming newsletter list. I do love reading newsletters. It's I think I started with like following like 20, and now I'm paring it down to only the ones that I like. There's just so much email out there. But yes, you're somebody that I would genuinely like to read and learn from, continue learning from, and follow. So just remind me or post. I'm sure you're going to post about it on LinkedIn at some point, and I'll be a glad subscriber. So thank you so much, Tracie. Have a safe and fun flight, and a fun time down in Florida, and an amazing summer. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you. Grateful for you too, Dawid. Bye.
Bye-bye.